Welcome to Marshman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, earlier crop insurance dates have been released. We have a discussion about the impact of planting earlier, the importance of seed treatment, and we break down soybean maturity with earlier planting.
Hi, this is Joe Marshman. Welcome to Marshman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars, Ben, Lynn, and Turk, and we got some exciting news to share with you about crop insurance dates, and Turk's going to lead that discussion.
So Joe, this week I stumbled across an article from Farm Week that actually talked about the Illinois initial planting dates have moved forward 10 days. And so that means that farmers will have the opportunity to plant 10 days earlier and still qualify for free replant on their crop insurance. And so I got to talking to several other states and talked to my own insurance agent, and he confirmed that in Iowa as well they have moved forward 10 days, at least in the counties that he covers, and so he assumes it's 10 days everywhere. I'm trying to get confirmation from that from regional RMA offices across the board, and once we get that, we'll share more information on that. But it's a big deal. It's a really big deal because we offer free replant for customers that as long as they're planting within the crop insurance dates, and that initial day now has moved our free replant forward by 10 days, and so that's a big deal. But the most important part is now that we're going to be planting a little bit earlier, our seed treatment becomes even more important, doesn't it, Joe?
Oh, it definitely does. And Turk, it's, you think the states like Nebraska, Minnesota, Kansas, and Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, you think they're all going to follow suit too?
It sounds like, from what I can tell, yes, that's the case.
So check with your local agent and see what's going on. And as far as that, if we push the planting dates up, in my opinion, we open the door up to a lot more sudden death. And Ben, do you want to make any comments on that?
Yeah, we have to have soil temps that are right around that, 50 and below, and cold saturated conditions for sudden death to happen, and that happens when the seed is pulling itself out of the ground. So we're looking at that time frame where if you are planting, so if you move that crop insurance date 10 days earlier, so we would go from the 21st to the 11th of April. And
we're talking soybeans here.
Yep, we're talking soybeans. So if you move that to the 11th, the probability of having soil temperatures that would match what sudden death conditions have to happen, we're definitely in that range where we could be cool, we can be wet, and sudden death protection is definitely something to look at.
And that's one of the things that I know you've been this past year, you've worked really hard to beef up our starting line seed treatment and our starting line plus with the addition of Heads Up. And you might just talk a little bit about Heads Up and how it meshes together with Sultro.
Correct. So Sultro is still going to be the big hammer that for fields that have had history of sudden death that are typically, if you've had history of sudden death, I'm always advising our customers to be planting Sultro treated seed. With the addition of Heads Up in our starting line, which is our standard treatment, it turns on genes on the inside of the plant that release oxalic acid, and that acid prevents certain fungi from infecting those root areas, and that starts as soon as the soybean germinates. So when those genes get turned on, it allows for season-long protection. And one of the fusarium species in sudden death that would be infecting the root, it provides a little bit of protection for those areas that have, may have like a sudden death root rot feature, but not necessarily a sudden death foliar symptoms where you don't have quite as much infection in that rooting zone. So it provides a little bit of protection against sudden death, but if you have fields that have had histories, like I said before, I always would recommend the Sultro in the starting line plus for those acres. For sure.
So we're just not overselling it, but what we're saying is that the Heads Up is going to give you a level of protection where you had 0, but it's not to the level that Sultro will give. And keep in mind, we have our multiple fungicides in there too. We also, when you plant early, you're also more prone to have insect problems, underground feeding, because plants are coming up slower, the seeds are coming up slower. Our seed treatment, I don't know of anyone that has a better option with Starting Line Plus, and even our basic starting line is superior. As we've had Amy and Ivor, if you go back a couple episodes, you can explain it in detail. And you know, we're not getting any rebuttal from our competitors saying, well, no, ours is better. It isn't. I mean, we really feel strongly that this plays into the farmer's hand. If you're going to plant early, make sure you're planting Mershman beans with Starting Line Plus on there, and you got the best chance to get a perfect stand.
And it's not something that when we're now into the beginning part of April, we're no longer in the second half. And when we're in the beginning part of April, and even some guys that are really pushing the bubble that are, you know, April 1st or even earlier than that, it's nobody argues the fact that you need to have seed treatment. There are some arguments when we're planting in May that certain agronomists would suggest otherwise, but when you are pushing your seed this early, nobody will argue that you need to have a robust seed treatment to get those seeds out of the ground and protect them. Because one of the things that I have pulled up here is from AgWeb. This is a Ken Ferry article, but it talks about the amount of time that the soybean seeds sit in the ground, and he has a March 20th planting date, an April 21st planting date, and a May 10th planting date. And in that March 20th planting date, it would take up to 35 days on average for a soybean seed to pull itself out of the ground. When you're planting on April 21st, the average is 9. When you're talking May 10th, the average is 9 as well. So when the seed is sitting in the ground that long, you know, by a factor of 3 or 4, that is when we really need to start thinking about how do we protect that seed when it's sitting in the ground.
Yeah, robust rates is one of the things, and that's what we use on our fungicides. In other words, we can give them that 25-day protection, where some of the seed treatments out there, and you got to compare and you got to look at rates, and most companies don't divulge their rates. You know, they may only be giving you 24 hours protection if, you know, if it's a non-systemic type product. You know, as soon as the seed cracks open, seed treatment's on the surface, you have nothing inside, you're sitting there butt naked basically underground. So
and it works the same way with insecticides too. There are certain insecticides that are super water soluble so that they are systemic within the plant, but if you're sitting in the ground that long and you are in a cool wet condition, you may lose your insecticide, and that's one of the main reasons why we are using the insecticide that we are, because we are not quite as water soluble, but definitely have the protection and stemicity. Have the protection and the stemicity for to control bean leaf beetles and insects and things of that such.
So there's a lot more that goes into seed treatments, and again, 60-some% of farmers out there, according to surveys, do not exactly know what seed treatment they have on it. So if you're planting brand X, you better ask your supplier, what are you getting, how long of protection you're going to get exactly. Do you have multiple modes of action against some of these diseases, which we have, all the major diseases, we have multiple modes of action, and particularly in Starting Line Plus, and it's a game changer, and that's one of the reasons why our seed may cost a little bit more. It's because and then that all translates into yield, because at the end of the day, you know, a perfect stand doesn't make any money. It's the yield from that perfect stand that makes you the money.
Correct. And that's one of the reasons, I guess, I wanted to talk about. Alex can pull this chart up again, but the whole point of planting your soybeans early, the beginning part of April that they're shooting for, is the amount of days that the soybean plant has in reproductive stages. So according to Ferry's chart here, he's looking at that March 20th has 52 days in reproductive staging, and the April 21st has 48 days in reproductive staging. And then when you get back to what most would consider a more normal planting date, that May 10th time frame, you're only looking at 37. So that's where all the yield comes from when you are putting a soybean plant. The more days you have to be in that reproductive time frame, it always is going to equate to more yield.
Yeah, a lot of studies indicate that you get more nodes and more pods per node, and so it sets up the potential. Obviously, weather, dry weather, different kinds of stresses can affect that, but it sets up the potential, and that's why farmers over the past few years are starting to plant their soybeans before the corn, because they're trying to pick up those extra days. And then that brings us to the other issue too, is do you have your seed? You know, we recognize that this was going to be an issue for our company, that farmers are now planting soybeans before corn. And so we made a concerted effort in all our production facilities and our deliveries to push the envelope as hard as we could to try to have as much of the seed possible delivered by April 1st. Not everybody plants prior to April 1st, or in that, you got to have the seed before you can plant. But the bottom line is we plan for this, and we're really pushing on it, and we have every couple of weeks we get an update on how our progress is going. And I can tell you that if you are dealing with a seed company that's not on top of this and you're using brand X, you might be ready to plant and no seed, and that would be a bad day for a farmer for sure. So get your seed on order. If you don't have it on order, get your seed delivered, because we're not that many days away from April 1st.
No.
And it all takes time. Logistics are the issue. You talk about all the problems they've had on the supply side on just about every product we buy the last 2 years. It can happen on soybeans too, and corn, if you're not proactive. Getting just-in-time delivery is getting harder and harder to do on a broad scale. You can do a few, but you can't do everybody.
Correct. So another thing that I wanted to mention here with that April 11th planting date here, and if all you got to do is drive 20 miles across the river and they're at an April 5th planting date, one of the things that Ferry was talking about, and I agree with, is when you are in that extreme, we always have talked about planting your earliest beans first. When you're in that extreme early, where you're not in the middle of April anymore, it's probably a good idea to be starting to think about planting your 3-6, your home location average maturity. I wouldn't necessarily be planting the earliest thing first, because the number of days that it has to take advantage of those extra reproductive stages is going to be tighter, because it's going to, obviously, it'll start flowering earlier, but it doesn't have as much of the season to take advantage of, because it's going to senesce quicker, it's going to mature quicker. Use that variety, like for us it'd be a 3-6, 3-7, 3-8 here in southeast Iowa. Use that variety that is the average maturity date, and then only put as many acres as you're willing to replant if they get frosted off in that early time frame as well.
Yeah, you mentioned frost, and we've seen a lot of first week of May frosts, and that's the danger of planting early, but there's a lot of other dangers out there too for farmers when they plant. So it's a calculated risk, and you can look at long range forecasts, and hopefully the government wouldn't be backing this if they didn't feel that there was strong data to support it. And that's what farmers want in early planting, because at the end of the day, every bushel counts on that farm, and this is the way to get it.
Yep. You and I have looked at a few farmers who have pushed the envelope on this, and it's totally anecdotal, but from the guys that we have dealt with, really the worst case scenario that we've had in the last 5 years is they are county average. The best case scenario is they're 5 to 10% above what the county average is. So when we look at that, the risk versus reward, there's definitely some very positive upsides. I think when we look at this, the year that was average, we spent almost 28 to 30 days below ground. Mm-hmm. The plant just didn't have enough heat to make that decision to come on out, and I think that's a really important discussion we had with those guys is the turpidity component as well. Having that food source with that bean let us hang out for a while. Some of them kind of corkscrewed and then decided, nope, I'm not gonna go. They're gonna go back down, but then they shot right back up. But I think it's something that locally here, and the guys down south have seen too, that pushing the envelope, one time you might get burnt, but the other few times seem to be very promising as far as the yield response.
Yep, absolutely. And
one of the forecasters that we followed, as we transition our weather patterns, and it could happen this spring, is we might have a very short window to plant our fields. And of course, if I saying that, a lot of you farmers would say, we've had that the last 3 years, Right. And so I would be geared up to plant fast if that's the case. So keep an eye on the weather too.
Right.
Retail locations don't like to hear that. That puts the sprayer guys behind the 8 ball. But yeah, you're definitely right. That it seems like locally, when we've looked at the last 4 or 5 years, that ideal planting window has really been 2 to 3 days. And then after that, you really start to see either rainfall dictate some problems, or timing. The first year that I started here with Mershman's, we planted for 2 days, and then nobody got back in the field for almost 3 weeks after that. Mm-hmm. And obviously that timing just was too much to overcome for most crops.
Our experience has shown that there's always 2 to 3 days a year that you should not plant, but we don't know what those 2-3 days are, because when we follow back up on our autopsies, on our replants and stuff, we can find out they're usually in that 2 to 3 day window, and it's all because of either very heavy saturating rain or some type of extreme cold
rain.
Yeah, cold rain. So the best advice if you're planting early is do not plant when a cold rain is coming, because that destroys the soybeans germination opportunity. And so 72 hours with no rain is ideal, and that normally gets you in planting into warmer conditions, not colder conditions. Always want to plant. It can be 32 degrees when you plant, but if by the end of the week it's going to be 70 or 75, you should be planting, because you always want to be planting on going to up, not down.
And if the forecast is favorable and the weather is right, always plant corn first. This is for those conditions where you're really pushing the envelope. Always plant corn when the forecast is right and the conditions are correct.
Lynn, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so we had our sales managers up for a meeting this week, and everyone is really excited about the opportunities that are coming up in the future. I wish we could talk about it on camera, but don't want to ruin the surprise. So, our folks were up. Thought we had a really great meeting and talked about the future of Merchant Seeds as we go through the 2023 planting season, how we finish out the year here, and then talking about stuff coming in the future. So, if you haven't visited with your rep or your dealer, definitely get in contact. Like Joe said, our deadlines are coming up very, very quickly.
Yeah, we're going to be planting soon. So once you get into 1st February, things start going fast. That's a short month. So get that seed ordered, get it delivered, get that planter tuned up, be ready to go, because with the opportunity you have this year, it's never going to be better. And prices are holding well. So this could be a great year for farmers, and we hope so anyhow. Well, that brings us to the corny jokes. And I got 3, no theme this week, just random corny jokes. I do have one that the ladies are going to really enjoy, because I'm sure you can use this one on your husband. But I'll start with some of the other ones first. I'll hold that one to last, okay? Now, this is an observation. You've always heard the expression, money does not grow on trees, right? If any of you parents, you probably told that when your kids asked for something that seemed a little bit out of line. Well, I'm going to ask you a question back. Then why do banks have branches if money doesn't grow on trees? Okay, Maybe there's something there. All right, let's warm you up. Okay, I think a lot of us have Amazon, do a little business with Amazon, and maybe have an Amazon Prime membership, it gives you special privileges and whatnot. So what do you call 2 monkeys that share an Amazon account? What do you call 2 monkeys that share an Amazon account? Primates. Amazon Prime, primates. Okay, this is the one for the wives out there. The husband comes home after a long day and said, "What's for dinner?" Wife says, "Nothing." Husband says, "Well, we had that last night." And the wife says, "I know, I made enough for 2 days." You've heard that, huh, Ben? Anyhow, thanks for watching today. We hope that you and your family are safe and healthy, and we sincerely appreciate your business, and we'll see you next week. Take care.